Content warning. In addition to the usual bones, blood, smut, and swear words, this podcast contains spoilers for all of Gideon the Ninth. If you have not finished Gideon the Ninth, turn back now. You know, unless you want to be spoiled. Very third house of you, honestly.
Episode 9, Chalk and Ink and Blood.
Let's recap. Chapter 17, Everybody tries to raise the dead. The 8th house siphons souls. Teacher is in a panic. Chapter 18, A shitty tea party with a bigger body count. The great debate, murder or ghosts.
What the fuck is happening? And boy, am I excited for this because John seems like...
He's raring to go. Honestly, my ideas have not really developed from last week, and so I genuinely just want to hear what he's cooking up.
Okay, cook.
It seems like souls can take over bodies and or corrupt them if they're empty vessels. And the Ninth is not a reliable narrator at all. We don't really have any confirmation that any of these people could actually be who they say they are. They could just be the body replaced with somebody else's soul and or corrupted. And my current conspiracy theories are two people. One is Corona Beth. Didn't seem like she was doing much of necromancy, so maybe she's not actually the person she's supposed to be. And then two is Dulcinea. Is Dulcinea who she is? She's supposed to be dead already. Why didn't they, if they can do this, why haven't they switched her body with somebody else and or has she been replaced? And then, is this how lictors stay alive for so long? Is they just transfer their spirits into new bodies? And then after time, is it just get harder and harder for the lictors to come back from the dead into a new body, which would make them reborn, like, all the time? And then... Cannon House is where they figured all of this out, and that's why there's a horde of ghosts down there. It's all the bodies they've been using over time to fuel this whole thing. And then the second thing is, it seems like there's some type of energy release, some type of necromantic energy when people die. And so now we just had a very, very prominent necromancer and her cavalier die in the facility, and I imagine that released a lot of necromantic energy, and we don't really get to see what happened or if that was used at all. That's my conspiracy theory, is that there might be switcheroos happening. Number two, this is where we figured out necromancy, and that's why there's hordes of ghosts down there. They've been using the bodies for things, and maybe that's how lictors work. So that's my rampant speculation.
That's a lot of food for thought.
I still think Teacher might be the emperor.
I think he's a lictor because he's calling all the people there children. He's been around for years and years and years. Like, the man's old. The question is he 500 years, 1,000 years, or 10,000 years?
Get in, losers. We're going speculating.
Hello, beautiful.
Okay.
Oh, man. So there's a lot to talk about today, Marie, but I actually think we should start with do you want to chat about John's rampant speculation?
He's so fucking close and so fucking far.
I know, he's going in the wrong direction, but he's like got all of the pieces and why things matter. You know, like that souls, are a potential source of power, that there may be kind of exchange of souls energy. I also, frankly, I would read his book where people are just hopping bodies continuously.
Yeah, that sounds like so much more fucked up in some ways.
Depends. It's not your best friend that you murdered so you can use them as a battery.
I mean, that's pretty awful too.
Yeah. Oh,
well,
boy.
One of them is like awful in the terms of you become a soulless, awful person because you're always seeing other people as commodities. And the other is that you live with self-hatred and an unbelievable level of guilt and self-hatred for, 10,000 years. And what does that do to you instead?
Yeah, I think it's probably not great for you one way or another.
No, probably not.
As a general rule, don't use other people as things.
What a crazy idea, Hannah.
I know. Should I start a religion? That's the only precept. Yeah, it was pretty funny to hear. It also is just funny that he picked up so hardcore on the siphoning. Because, of course, we know that siphoning is something that's gonna leave a hole that something can come and climb into. And that's sort of where the devil comes from that shows up near the end of the book.
Well, and it also makes me wonder what it is exactly that they're pulling at when they're siphoning. Like, it's still unclear to me, because it really does seem to me like they're pulling at life force from that specific person, but then maybe through that they can start pulling at something else. Because
It's also, so it's not totally clear, but later in this book, and I can't remember if it's in the siphoning challenge or if it's something Palamity says later, but they describe it as the eighth house like sends the soul away, which creates a vacuum. And it's that vacuum that's drawing the power.
Right.
Yeah. So that still is not 100% clear. You don't know if it's just that a vacuum is a powerful. I don't understand how Thanergy works, man. I ain't a necromancer.
Well, and I think we can do a lot of hand wavy, but so whatever. My child just asked me if he could send me a list of things so that he could make brioche bread. And I'm like,
you're like, yes, you can make brioche bread.
Anyway, sorry if I look slightly distracted. Send me the list.
Oh, so one thing I wanted to actually say. So I think it's funny that they think Teacher is the emperor. Mm-hmm. And I will say that Teacher actually says when he introduces himself that he wants them to call him Teacher as kind of like a stand-in for the man that he hopes they one day will call Teacher.
Yep.
But one of the things they picked up on was that he's always calling them all children. And that's true because he is kind of infinitely old, which is, to be fair, that is a spoiler. Like, it's going to be revealed that Teacher's not a person, is a construct that has existed probably for 9,000 years. But I wanted to mention something that I think I've forgotten too. Dulcinea routinely calls Gideon a child. And I think it's really funny. She slips up. She fucking forgets because she's Cytherea and she is, 9,000 years old. And it's just like, that is actually a hint. People who call people children
are so fucking old that they can't see anybody who isn't 10,000 years old as anything other than literal babies.
Exactly. So I feel like that's real. The other thing that's like kind of fun and interesting about the dynamic in these chapters between Dulcinea and Silas is that, so Dulcinea doesn't seem to help raise Abigail and Magnus. We, of course, know that she's the one responsible for their deaths, so that checks out. But I also always think it's really interesting that Pro punches Silas before he can fully siphon. And I feel like that's because Cytherea is an infinite battery. And that what happens when you siphon a lictor?
I think that it's both that he doesn't want Silas to recognize that he's starting to siphon Cytherea and that she's an infinite battery. But I also think that it's because it starts working.
Yeah.
I think both of those things start happening at the same time. And I also think it's really funny that, like, Gideon notices he didn't even bother to pull out his sword. He just punches him. And it's like, yeah, it's because he can't fucking use his sword because he's 100%.
Dead. This is actually, okay, casually, what happens when you siphon a lictor? What happens if you are pushing, in this case, Cytherea's soul into the river? And what we know is that when a lictor's soul is going into the river, the soul that pops up in their body is their cavalier. Like, wouldn't it be funny if you actually would end up with like a transfer to like Loveday? I mean, that's not what happens here, but I think it's an interesting premise.
Oh, no. Yeah. But I don't know if you can even siphon a lictor.
No, I mean, who knows, right? There's no way she finishes this in one book, is what I'm trying to say. There's no fucking way.
Well,
there's a lot happening.
She'll finish it, but we won't be satisfied.
All right. You want to make a bet? I'm going with 2 more books.
No! I just want it. I want to know what happens.
Ugh, I would totally read just like side books about things that are actually happening in the 9 houses where it's like what you do in a day on the 7th, you know?
Well, speaking of, I got so teased and upset and I was like, ugh. And she probably never will, but I wish she would just like put it on like AO3 or something like after she's actually published the book. But she wrote like a whole side, like this is why it's taking so long. She wanted to make sure that like the timeline was working or whatever, right? Like obsessive writers, like I understand what's wrong with you, but also come on, just give me the damn book. But in addition to like starting with Nona as supposedly only being like the first little bit of Electo and then being like, oh, whoops, it's a whole other book. She additionally apparently wrote another like 30 to 40,000 words.
Oh my God, which is a whole book.
On this whole side thing, which is like this basically alternate universe Electo.
Oh my God.
to make sure that her timeline works for something.
I fucking hope she publishes these things. I love all of the side pieces. Like, there's something so enjoyable. And I'm actually surprised. I'm quite surprised that her publisher has not made some sort of like formal website where you can see her short stories, for instance, because you kind of have to dig to find them on the internet. But it's so much fun to have these like other little glances into what's happening concurrently, because this is part of the fun of an unreliable narrator is like, you only see what you get to see. There's a lot more happening outside of your peripheral view. And I want to see it all. Would I read all of these books forever? And it's the only book I ever read until the end of time?
I mean, maybe.
Medium, yes.
Oh, there was one more thing that John said that I was like, which is he thinks that Corona is somebody who could potentially be dead because she's obviously not doing necromancy.
I know. Sorry. That was amazing. Yeah, exactly. This is so funny because actually both of them really picked up on her not doing necromancy. Brooke was like, she just doesn't want to like be, having blood sweat in front of people. And John's like, no, she's just not a necromancer. But I think the idea, my favorite part of that, the funniest part of that is John is like, she is an imposter, but Dulcinea is an imposter.
I was like, she is.
Well, and also it's worse than that because, like, I know Dulcinea is an imposter, but also at no point is he realized that Protesilaus also a dead imposter.
Oh my gosh,
this is fun. There are imposters here, but we don't know who they are.
Yeah, and I love like on a reread, just reading her descriptions of, how Protesilaus is described as looking dead. and like never using his sword.
The most boring man alive.
The most boring man alive, taking a minute to respond to a question in a dinner party. And then also the way that Corona is described. And you're like, oh my God, like, yeah, obviously she's not a necromancer.
She's so vibrant, though. She's definitely not dead, but she's something. The whole thing. Fabulous.
I really like that what you picked up on, too, is like the same thing of Dulcinea / Cytherea calling everybody children. I'm like, oh no.
It's literally like every time. She does
Right
it
there.
routinely. And she actually, I can't even remember when it happens. It may have already happened. But she catches herself at one point. She's like, oh,
yeah.
I know you're just a little bit younger than I am. Like,
and you're like, you should have caught that. But it's like, again, Tamsin, like pointing it out, like, look what I did.
Yes, she's...
And then you're like,
This
oh, right,
is why
she explained
she's
it
taking
away.
so long. She has to very nitpickily write because we're going to pick apart every piece of what she says. And so far, her track record is 100%.
Yeah, I'm so excited. I'm so excited for more theories. They're doing very well.
Oh, yes.
But also,
Yes.
how do we keep them on the wrong track?
Full sabotage mode. So this is interesting because every couple of chapters, there's sort of a different theme and a different focal point. Like right now, John is on siphoning because it's something that happened. I'm interested to see what that they will think about next week, because next week we explore our very first lictoral study and you get the first kind of intimations of what the OG lictors were. And then we're going to get the Gideon
test. Aren't we going to get the Gideon paper?
And we're going to get the Gideon paper, which is like,
if
that's not
mind.
a place to spoiler. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, he's going to lose his mind. Okay.
Rampant speculation. Give Gideon my congratulations.
Okay. Great.
Episode 10. It's very easy to die.
Let's recap. Chapter 19. Second House Skull. Gideon and Harrow go through a locked door. Harrow discovers a cool necromancer thing. Gideon finds a note to herself. Chapter 20. Seventh House Skull. Dulcinea asks Harrow to team up. The most efficient death trap I've ever seen. And Gideon gives up her juice.
What the fuck is happening?
Okay, I have a lot of conspiracy theories. I had to write them all down because we're stirring the pot. I picked up on some things. I wanted to piece them together about what we're doing in Canaan House. So what I think is happening here is that each house has crafted a task, and it turns out that the reward is like a key to their room or some room or whatever. And it seems like what we had is that we had the second made the winnowing challenge in the laboratory, which, by the way, was laboratory number 2. And the reward was a key in their color. They keep getting assigned the red color. And so the red key was the key to the second room from laboratory 2.
What color was Dulcinea's key?
Gray. Hold on, we'll get there. I have thoughts about that.
Oh,
okay,
yeah,
so then we just did like this siphoning challenge. I think this is the 8th house's challenge because it was in laboratory number 8. The magic is like thematically consistent. And the key is white, which is like Dulcinea used white to describe them when she was talking about how like they were cold and white. And then now, yes, John, Dulcinea is wearing a gray key. And if I were her, I would have done the 7th challenge first. The one that like made the most sense for my kind of magic. And earlier in the book, we had Harrow describing like grayer houses as not being the 2nd, not being the 3rd. So maybe that's like the 6th and the 7th. We now know it's not the 8th, probably is white. So like 6th and 7th are probably the grayer houses. I bet she did the 7th house one already. I don't know what the purpose is. Like what exactly did we learn in the room? Like Harrow, I guess, like got more knowledge, the actual theorems on how to reconstruct.
This is some exquisite
bones.
Cooking, by the way. I just want to say.
Thank you.
That's very 6th house.
Yeah, so then the other thing we learned, didn't you give me 3rd?
But that was based on your hair.
The other thing we did get from the second room, which, like, I don't know, I guess if we were putting together an escape room, you might, like, do something like this. But if it's just, like, you know, this is history and we're discovering history or whatever, we have, like, the note. We talked about earlier the fact that I think that Gideon was one of the occupants of that room. Maybe probably attained lictorhood. In my head, we have Gideon was in this room, became a lictor, and then we have somebody crash landing onto the 9th in a spacesuit yelling, Gideon, Gideon, Gideon. And so I think that was the second lictor. And we also had this other like very obscure thing. We didn't talk about it in this episode, actually. Something that they taught that was written. Something about one flesh.
Marie, do you want to tell us what it is?
One flesh, one end.
One flesh, one end. And that it's G and P at the end. So another G for Gideon, probably.
Just goes to the conspiracy theory that the lictors are made by like shoving the soul of somebody else into the necromancer, into the cavalier. Necrolier.
I agree. I think the lictor is like a fusion of the necro and the cab. I completely think that that's exactly what's happening. Kind of freaky. So like 2 souls in one kind of idea. And so I think that we could go completely wild here. What if Gideon is like actually the reborn lictor's spirit? I find it very suspicious that we had what I think is a lictor crash landing on the 9th. There's like maybe 2 spirits. Somebody's freaking out. Gideon. Maybe that's like the other, whoever P is. Like the soul of P screaming for Gideon. They're dead. Or maybe Gideon now has been like transplanted into the baby. And Gideon is now the lictor spirit of some sort. And we're looking for, I don't know. Ooh, does that mean Dulcinea's part of it?
I'm taking your theory and plugging into my theory, which is that I now think, just based on the X out faces in this picture, I'm wondering if Cannon House was basically just like the Manhattan Project of necromancy. And like they were pulling together all these talented necromancers, putting them in the same place and like pulling this all together. And I'm wondering like if the Necrolord Prime just took all of the like advanced necromantic theorems together. And like that's how part of how he became so powerful is he got like basically the most advanced knowledge from all of the houses that was generated. The other conspiracy is I still think they use this with all the ghosts running around to create empty vessels for the lictors or do experiments and whatnot. And so it would make sense if the lictor from the second house was carrying Gideon in like basically like a mind wiped old lictor Gideon, put her into a baby. They would have to like eject the soul of a baby out of that baby, right, to transfer her. And then take her to the 9th house, right, as like a cycle of being reborn. So maybe I'm trying to think of how to make this a coherent theory.
Get in, losers. We're going speculating.
Oh my God.
This is going to be a whole episode just talking about what they talked about.
How did Brooke like completely get it, but also backwards? And then also John took it and ran with it and completely confused them.
It was great. It made me so happy. This is
Also, I kept looking at your face and I could see your like very wide eyes, like trying to be a poker face. And I was like, that is the most fake Hannah face I have ever seen in my entire life.
But it's funny because I try to do that no matter what they do because I'm trying to normalize nonsense. Okay, so Brooke is totally right about the challenges. And she's done a really great job with the colors literally from the beginning. So that's great.
Well, like she said, she was like, oh, this is Harry Potter house colors. And I was like, actually,
You're like,
you're
dead
completely dead on.
The things that they think lictors are so interesting. I love that, like, John right now is on this kick of completely understanding what a lictor is, but backwards, where he thinks that it's going to be the necros spirit inside of the calf's body.
And it absolutely makes complete sense in terms of, like, you would want the more healthy body, but also that isn't the way that necromancy works. You can't, like, we know now from Nona that you can't do necromancy, or it's, like, supposed to be both the spirit and the body.
Yeah, like, you can't move a spirit around and keep it intact, really. Like, a spirit sort of decays when it's not attached to its body. I mean, part of it is that they're thinking about the spirit as though it were the mind and the memories. And the spirit has some of that, but the way lictorhood ends up working is literally just the power source of the spirit.
When we're thinking about who Gideon would be, like Gideon in the past, obviously Gideon in the past was also female.
Yes, they have so many of the pieces, and there are pieces that they literally cannot yet know. They simply do not know enough to know the details, but they're getting there so closely.
So close.
I would also like to share with our, like, spoiler audience something that John did not touch really hard, and I'm kind of
mad.
I know. So John texted us last week, because we took a week off recording. John texted us that he thinks Dulcinea is a lictor, and both of us, I feel bad. I feel like we gaslit him, but I didn't tell him he was wrong. I was like, oh, how cute is it that they're so paranoid? And so he, like, pulled back from it this week, but I cannot fucking believe that he knows that Dulcinea is a lictor. I'm so mad. What an incredible pull. Like, I absolutely did not ever come up with this while I was reading.
No, he immediately, like, from the perspective of reading it and having her say, I didn't want to die, he clocked that. And I think it's so clear reading it back. And it's like, not just, it's like, that is like the smoking gun in that conversation. But it's like the way that she's talking to Gideon and saying, we take so much. And who is it? Who are we to ask you to do this? And all of this. Yes, it still thematically could make sense of somebody who is a necromancer asking a cavalier to do these things.
Dulcinea's whole conversation with the semi-conscious Gideon is fascinating. Like, it's also kind of heartbreaking, actually, when you know what we know, because you're hearing her basically meditate on what she did to Loveday. Mm-hmm. Like, it's so heartbreaking. And you're absolutely right. I mean, so what John caught was this past tense, but I can't remember, which might have been last episode. We were talking about how the other thing that Dulcinea does regularly is she calls everyone a child. You know, you poor baby. Like, as though, because everyone is a baby when you're 10,000 years old.
I feel sympathy because Dulcinea is very ill. Like, even the real Dulcinea, I feel like she could theoretically go around calling everybody babies, and I would still kind of, like, as somebody who is approaching 40 and works with 19-year-olds.
Babies.
They are babies. Like, I can see being terminally ill for a very long time, like, adds another 15 or 10, 20 years to kind of, like, your actual age of life experience and, like, your perspective. So even the fact that she's, like, supposed to be, like, what, 27 or something like that, even for her, that character, you could still see a place where she is saying also babies.
So that's, like, one of the things that's brilliant consistently about Tamsin Muir is that she's created this scenario where you can easily explain it away to yourself because it makes sense. It works as a metaphor, but it wasn't a metaphor. Also, actually, separately, the little, like, dots over the top of the lintel, I love the idea of them being constellations, but there are 5 over the second house, and the constellation Aries only has 4. So I kept trying to find, like, a 5 constellation.
Oh, there isn't? I thought there was.
The only one that's 5 is Cassiopeia, which giant question mark mode, but also not an astronomer or an astrologer. So please, if you have fan theories, email us. The animals over the door, I like the idea of them being oryx. So oryx are these incredible antelopes. They have unbelievably long horns, these long curving horns that come to a wicked point, as is described. The reason I like this is because the Arabian oryx is one of the famous tales of our era resurrection. So the Arabian oryx was fully extinct in the wild for about 15 years and was actually bred in zoos and then repopulated.
Oh, that's amazing.
Don't you love that?
I do. I really like that. I really like that.
Episode 11. Someone's dead.
Let's recap. Chapter 21. Skull Watch. 6th House Skull. Gideon's necromancer overreacted. Only 1 or 2 keys left. There is no law. Chapter 22. 4th House Skull. Jean-Marie calls in the cavalry. Cremains in the incinerator. Protestalaus goes missing.
What the fuck is happening?
I kind of think that it's pretty suspicious that, like, the 4th house was just very coincidentally taking a look in the incinerator for bodies and happened to find one. That's a big coincidence. Like, so now I'm thinking that this might be some sort of a poor cover-up for, like, a big mental breakdown that led them to killing Protestalaus or whoever else is missing. And then they needed to find a way to eliminate any evidence because, like, Palamedes is a super spy. And they needed to pin it on some, like, nebulous other, like, oh, I'm seeing people out of the corners of my eyes, ghosts. They're very disheveled. They could have easily been the people, like, chopping up bodies and shoving them into the incinerator. I don't know. Mental breakdown.
It is creepy to be checking incinerators.
And then finding a dead body, like, in an incinerator. Like, what? Too big of a coincidence.
Again, I just want to give Brooke her flowers for her conspiracies last week, which were just amazing and led to some of mine as well. So I am now of the opinion that Cannon House is sitting either on a ley line, basically the necromancer equivalent of a ley line, or it's kind of where they first figured out how to break the plane. Like, going back to my theory about this, where they discovered how necromancy works, I think it's either like a ley line or it sits on top of the river Styx. Like, basically that's why everything's always wet, is that it overlaps the spirit world in a place where the river Styx and or the spirit world is very close to reality. And they were able to break that open by doing creating the tens of thousands of ghosts. Like, all of that thanergy was used to break the barriers between the realms. And that's why this place is just like a nexus of just spirit energy and kind of, sad spirits and everything else. A bunch of very horrible things happened here. And that's what happened. There might have been a flood involved. I feel like with all the biblical references, maybe the river Styx broke through and flooded the earth. And that was the apocalypse that they had.
Yeah, no, interesting. Okay, I'm loving this reference to river Styx. I think that is super cool. I do want to point out that, like, there's a lot of weird references to puddles of, like, light and puddles, like, referring to light being cast as similar to water in these chapters for whatever reason. I do think that a lot of the warp doors that I was like, oh, there was, like, the tides rose and swamped this house at some point. I think it's better explained by the rain. Coming through the holy ceiling, but there's a lot of unnecessary water features, and I'm loving the idea that this is like some like allusion to river Styx being like in a similar plane of existence. That's super cool.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if they caused the apocalypse or they were trying to stop the apocalypse, right? Like, is this the place where they accidentally let the river Styx through and that's what like caused the like end times, or the end times was coming and this is where they tried to figure out necromancy to stop it or contain it or something along those lines. But I feel like there's definitely a flood as part of that.
So definitely apocalyptic moment then.
Yes. My other thing is I think we have confirmation, at least in my mind, that part of becoming a lictor is the, like 2 souls, 1 body, but it's definitely like taking over the body, which is why Pal doesn't want to do it, because it's really just like subjugating your cavalier in a lot of ways. I think that's why he doesn't want to do it. It's just like a lot of suffering and a lot of just...
What do you mean he doesn't want to do it?
Well, it's not, because it just from like the way that he talks in this chapter, it seems like he's just like, God help us all if we actually have to go through with this process. And he doesn't want to do the soul siphoning, which seems to be part of at least the process of becoming a lictor. So like, I think he's figured it out that that's the process.
Get in, losers. We're going speculating.
We need to talk about what John just said.
Yeah, he's the one who picked up that Palamedes has it figured out, which I didn't clock that the first 500 times that I've read this book. I don't clock that he has it figured out until he tells Harrow at the end, where they start talking about their theories. Like, when he and Harrow start talking about it, then you're like, oh, he thinks he's got it figured out. And then, like, later on, he very much has it figured out and is like, there's no way I'm fucking doing that. You know, when he goes in and like tells Ianthe, like, what have you done? you didn't actually do it, did you?
Right. He actually figures it out. And so, like, we know I think it even may be in the next chapter, that he figures out that he thinks it's a mega theorem. And Harrow's idea is that it's like a secret locked door that they're going to get to. And to be honest, I think there is more to Canaan House than meets the eye. So actually, locked doors probably exist. But the point of the lictor thing is this mega theorem. So yeah, I think Palamedes figures it out and figures out, like John said, both that it is a merging of two people, but also that it is a subservient merging. It is not two equal partners on equal footing. The way the lictor process works, it is about the dissolution of the cavalier. That was amazing to hear John say. That was incredible. I also thought it was like so wild that he's decided that this is a magical place and that it may actually be on the River Styx, because that's basically our spoiler theory.
Yeah, none of us have gotten there yet.
But I think it's interesting, and I wonder if we will ever actually get any like information on how necromancy started in the first place. Sorry, Kate, I had a moment. Okay, so there's like a really obvious moment here when Isaac is like, Corona, you're the only other necromancer here. Can't you tell they're fresh remains? And Corona's like silent.
There's another one where like everybody's saying like, well, of course necromancers know this. And Corona's like side eye. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But I literally thought in my head, like, you're not a wizard, Corona Beth. Like the opposite.
You're not a wizard.
And I love the idea of starting with the no, you're not. You don't get to go to special school. You suck. Although she doesn't suck. She's amazing. You know, you get it. I have a truly dumb query for you. Do you think that Cytherea actually laid out in the rain that entire time? Or was she just like waiting under an umbrella, jumping up and down, waiting for someone to come find her and then sprawling so that she looked like she was like out in the rain the whole time?
I think she's lived for 10,000 years and she was like, oh yeah, this is a new experience that I haven't had for like 4,000 or 5,000. And she's just going for it.
That's pretty funny.
That's my read.
In my heart of hearts, I feel like she's convinced that she is much more in control of everything than she actually is. And so I feel like she's like a meticulous planner and would be more likely to like time it out perfectly. But I like the version that she's like, I don't give a shit. It's rain.
Yeah. Like, I've been literally dying for 10,000 years. The rain is not going to do anything. This is a new and interesting experience. Although I also think that she probably is deliberately haunting and terrorizing the Fourth. And I think it's just because she's a sadistic bitch.
Sorry, it's horrifying. It's truly... God, the Fourth are so tragic. And this is one of the few places where I kind of like have a little bit of an eye roll with Tamsin Muir, is Sextus being like, I wonder how dangerous they are, which I think is kind of, as Brooke said at the beginning, a classic mystery writer thing where it's just explicitly just trying to make us be like, oh no, it's this person, it's that person, who is it? Because the Fourth are just objectively the fucking saddest. They are broken. They are so traumatized that they are at the edge of their brains. Like they are, there would be no coming back from this.
I feel the same thing about that with like, eye roll, Tamsin. And also, that's consistent with Pal.
How so?
Of being like, I wouldn't discount them.
So it's more about not being
it's
ageist and making assumptions about whether their power is real.
Obviously meant to get us all fucked up, to be suspect everyone and then get whiplash in the next couple chapters. It is so obvious that is why it's there. But I also think that it is completely and totally consistent with Pal's character to be like, you really think so? You really think that they're just not up to anything?
Right. Like, pay attention to the whole situation. Don't just let your emotions, color how you're interpreting what's going on.
But yeah, I loved that on a slow, careful reread, it is so fucking obvious that Corona is not a necromancer and that Palamedes knew what was going on at this point.
Yeah.
And it's so easy to miss it even on a reread.
Actually, I think specifically the way Pal responds to Corona in these chapters says to me that he knows and he pities her. And that's a really funny one, too. I think he knows that she's not a necromancer.
Oh, yeah. I think you're right, because why else would he say, oh, I'll take you down there? That could be his way of, like, trying to figure out if she is.
Fair enough. I have something just very dumb to say. Are you ready? One of my favorite movies of all time is Happy Death Day, and its sequel, Happy Death Day 2. They're time loop movies, time loop slasher thriller movies, and I highly recommend them. Perhaps we'll do one for a bonus episode. But basically, it's a murder mystery in the first one. And then in the second one, they make it kind of a dimensional drift so they can do the exact same thing again, but it's a different person who murdered this time. And I kind of feel like there's a part of me that would love to read Gideon the Ninth again and again, but with different people being the killer in each instance. I do think it would be really fucking funny to have this book written again, but it is the fourth house that actually murdered everyone.
Don't tempt me. I might dabble in fanfic for the first time in my life. Episode 12. Fidelity, 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 fidelity. Act 2.
Let's recap. Chapter 23, Second House Skull. 2 sets of cremains. Much ado about keys. Cam goes loud. Chapter 24, Sixth House Skull. Yet more ado about keys. Harrowhark rises to the challenge. Sex Pal. Chapter 25, Fourth House Skull. Protesilaus cannot be found. A veritable cancer of bone and tooth. Death of the fourth.
What the fuck is happening?
Okay. So the problem with this format is that I have nothing to do but reread these chapters and dig through because you folks will not let me read ahead. And so I think at this point I've reread every chapter in this book at least 3 times.
He's on his third reread and he hasn't even finished the book.
Because I read the chapters immediately after we finish recording, and then I reread them on the Friday before we record, and then sometimes I'm looking through them as things pop into my head over the course of the week. So, all right. I also went back through and listened to all of my 11 previous episodes conspiracy theories so that I could try to make a cohesive conspiracy theory. So,
okay.
All right.
Well, wait, a mega theorem? A mega conspiracy theorem?
Dawn has a mega theorem.
Yes. So.
All right. I'm so excited.
Okay. All right. So the whole universe is still in decay. The houses aren't quite what they say. The houses leading candidates for that are the 6th house and the 9th house, mostly from Cam and also Gideon, but also potentially the 7th house, because I still think that Dulcinea should be dead. And also Dulcinea's name is like the character from Don Quixote, which is just like a made up character. So like that just seems like symbolism if we're going through like all of the like very interesting names of things. So those are the 3 suspicious houses. The military keep conquering planets to basically keep things going and keeping the bone juice flowing, because every time they conquer planets, like more death energy is released into the universe. So based on biblical themes and canon being the promised land in the Bible, I think canon house is where either they figured out how necromancy was discovered as a way to save humanity from a flood, or there was a flood coming and like sent by God for humanity's transgressions, and this is where they figured out how to save humanity or reborn humanity after the flood. It is why everything's wet. It's why everything is, destroyed. And that's also why there's so many angry ghosts in the basement. I'm also still not sure that it's possible that canon house is just like a ley line or a point where just like the barrier between life and death is very, very close, or it's where they broke through that barrier, and maybe it's where the flood originated from. So I don't know. There's something there with like, this is where the birthplace of necromancy was, and the flooding and something, because it seems very just like biblical. I still think Lictor-ing is taking over someone's body, and that's why Tal doesn't want to do it to Cam, because it would like destroy her soul or something. I think we have imposters after there being 2 bodies in the incinerator. I think that the only reason that there would be 2 bodies, so it would be 1 body if it was a lictor, I think, if like the lictors have been dying and they're burning them. But with 2 bodies, I think it's possible that they replaced 2 members of the houses. Maybe the folks got there a month, they tricked them, they went there a month earlier, we burned them, and we replaced them with somebody else. But there's 2 bodies that died at the same time. I think we might have imposters.
What?
What? I think it's a lictor, one of the original lictors, or a spirit of the lictor is killing people because they're doing necromancy to like kill them. And also there's like some other things. So if it's a alive lictor, I think it's 9th house, because they got the bone spears into the second one through the keyhole, which is something that they mentioned that she could do that in the very first chapter, where they're like, she tries to block the keyhole so Harrowheart can't throw bones in to wake Gideon up or like grab her like into her room.
John?
And so I think if it's a live lictor, it's 9th house, and it would also make sense why the bone constructs are killing people, because bone constructs is a 9th house thing. It would also explain why the bone constructs wandering around the canon house are so good, because that's also a 9th house thing. Or it could be a dead lictor whose spirit is still hanging around, and that would explain why you can't really tell why they're there, or like you can't see them. They're not tripping bone wards. They're sort of like floating in between. It would also go into the conspiracy that this is kind of like a place where the gap between life and death is very narrow, because they could be just like going into the live side of things, writing death to the fourth house, then going back into the dead side, sending I don't know. There's something there. I think Teacher might also be a lictor. I don't think he's the Emperor anymore. I think he's also one of the lictors. It would explain why he's scared to go down into the facility.
You think Teacher's
There's probably
a lictor?
angry ghosts. I think it's possible. And then lastly, I think, and this is just really, I think when the floods got sent to destroy humanity or something else, basically how the God Emperor became God is he lictored the actual God.
Lictored the God.
So, or death. Like basically like the embodiment of death and or God was lictored by a man, and that's how they became the man-God hybrid. And then the spirit of God is what is behind the locked tomb. So it's like we threw the spirit of God into the locked tomb, locked him up, and the God Emperor is now in like the body of God, but was previously a man. And also they say there's only one eye, and that's really interesting. Like when they say like the prayer of the ninth house is that, you know, yeah, they only mention one eye in prayer of the ninth house. They say let like the eye never be opened. It's not eyes, it's eye. And so a rolled rock is also what the Cyclops is from the Odyssey.
Whoa.
So who is a shepherd.
Well, what
So
did you just say? Hold on.
basically
Go back to this one eye thing. Wait, there's a rock, there's a one eye.
The prayer of the ninth house says that may the eye never be open, may the brain never wake, or something along those lines. And it's only one eye. And may the rock never be rolled away. And the only one-eyed thing with a rock that gets rolled away is the story of the Cyclops from the Odyssey, where he's the shepherd that gets tricked by Odysseus and stabbed, and you know that's how they escape. Is they trap him in the cave.
Oh.
And they blind him. So I think God or death, depending on how, like basically like the higher power of the universe, is his spirit is trapped in the locked tomb.
What the fuck?
So I've obviously read this way too much, and either I think I figured it all out, or I'm so off base it's going to be hilarious when I listen back to these in the future.
I'm so glad you went back to what is in the locked tomb, because I feel like that's one of those things that's kind of in the subtext right now, but like obviously a large overarching part of this world. Yeah. It's cool you're reaching to Roman mythology. Greek? Shit, what is Odysseus?
Greek. Okay, Brooke.
It is so much fun to listen to you. Go on.
I have not been able to connect further dots, to synthesize things. I was very impressed by the keyhole thing, John, because coming out of these chapters, I was like, how the hell did we get into this, like, second house room? Like, Teacher's under the impression that, like, the danger is in the facility. There's, like, a locked door hatch. What the fuck is it doing outside? Like, that breaks all the rules. Dude, interesting. Things that I think we do know. I bet that all that white fluff that's in the facility, that's the bone monster, right? That's got to be the bone monster. All the white fluff that's on the floor.
Oh yeah, like all the dust and everything. Yeah.
That's the bone monster.
No, I put
just like all the like goo gel that was in the response room that would dissolve or reform. What don't we know? So we were talking about this earlier. Why the fifth house first? Why the fourth house second, or maybe seventh? Like, the obnoxious pattern recognition in my brain is like trying to do something here, and it's not coming to anything, except for the fact that like there are a lot of people who've been down in the facility for a long time without like being bothered, right? Why are the ninth house, the seventh house, the sixth house, eighth, like totally fine? Like, how come we went for the fourth house and the fifth house first? Like, is there something special about that? Like, it feels targeted, but like, why is that? Yeah. So, John, I don't know if you're right about this being a ninth house lictor, live or dead. You did a lot more cooking than I did, and I got to wrap my head around a lot of that still.
I mean, also, just like thinking about it now, it could also be like the story of Jesus, where they roll the stone away.
What's that one?
When they go to check on the body.
If you don't roll the rock away, do you know if the resurrection happened? Is it
Schrodinger's Jesus.
Fucking A.
Still think the spirit and or body of God is behind the tomb. Now I think it's more just a reference to Jesus as opposed to Greek mythology.
God, you think there's actually like some religious entity underneath this? Like, for some reason, despite this book having like the entire ninth house cult being a Roman Catholic church of sorts, or a derivative of it, I And the lictor being some sort of a god, or sorry, the Necrolord Prime being their god in some form. I like very much do not get religious vibes from these books. Like in the end, like ultimately it feels like these are books that are just grounded in like a harsh planetary reality. That's just, God, that doesn't make sense. There's like spirit magic and shit. I shouldn't get that vibe. I don't know why I get that vibe. Just me?
Get in, losers. We're going speculating.
I wrote notes!
Before anything else happens, can I just say how excited I am for them to meet God?
They're going to... Brooke is going to be so fucking pissed.
Oh my God. I mean, John can cook, but this week really took it home.
So I made a list. I made a list. Can we go through it point by point? Okay.
I think we should.
He's talking about the river rising and etc., and he is almost there, but I think what he talks about with in terms of the river and like ley lines and where Canaan House is and etc., I think that he is talking about stuff that we haven't even seen and is going to be potentially feeding into stuff in book 4. That's what I think. Okay.
Agreed. Because it's honestly, he's speculating about a lot of the things that you and I have been speculating about behind the scenes.
Okay. Next point.
Yeah.
Dulcinea and her name.
Oh, I loved that. I had not made the Don Quixote connection, but that is like so on point.
If you read Tamsin's thing about names, ding, ding, ding.
That's so funny. We are going to have to do a bonus episode that's just for the naming conventions. That's so good.
Next one, that because there are bodies in the incinerator that are old, that there are imposters. Okay, ding, ding, ding.
That was the most I've ever had to like control myself, I think, because that is... this is like the crux of these chapters for me, which immediately gets forgotten. Like the most important part of these chapters, aside from the death of the fourth, is the beginning of chapter 23 when they're like, there are 2 bodies, not one, and they're old.
Older than we've been here.
Right. Suddenly, that shifts the calculus so much and only makes sense in the context of at least one person who is there is not who they say they are. And well done, John.
Next one, there is a lictor killing people.
Oh my
ding,
God.
Ding, ding, ding. Okay, then we go off the deep end a little bit. Okay, so it's a ninth house lictor because of the keyhole. And have to do a little buzzer noise. Not a bad pull. Not a bad idea given what we know, but that's not what is going on.
I do think it's interesting that it's interesting that Kithurea ends up using this massive bone construct, right? Because the 7th house isn't particularly bony, but I kind of think that the OG lictors have less specialization than the houses ended up doing,
really think so.
right? I mean, because they're sort of creating this shit as they go. I mean, even the fact that the 2nd house challenge down in the facility is a bone golem monster of regenerating bone, but that was created by the 2nd house person.
Next thing, that it is a dead lictor, buzzer sound. Next little floaty, maybe you're getting there, is that teacher is a lictor. Teacher isn't a lictor, but teacher is something real fucking weird.
Yes. Teacher is not human, but it's been interesting how much focus John has had on Teacher, which I think is actually probably my fault just because I think Teacher is funny. I've been focusing on Teacher. Teacher's not an important character. No. He's an interesting feature.
Yeah, but he's not important. Yeah, that's probably funny. We probably led him in a direction. Their experience reading these books is completely different than anybody else's, but whatever.
Fascinating.
And then we go really off the deep end with the one eye and the Cyclops and the rolled rock and whatever. And that is completely not what it is.
I love that he remembered the locked tomb.
Brooke actually brings up some really good discussion points, which is why do we have this order that we're killing people in? So it's very obvious why Kithurea killed the 5th. She killed the 5th because they were about to blow her cover.
Right. They were a threat to her because of Abigail's studies.
But why the 4th?
I actually have a theory. So I have a theory that I came up with on the 4th that I came up with just now.
Oh, I love it. Tell me.
Because I've always thought it was bullshit that, she kills the 4th. They're just teenagers. They can't hurt anyone. I think that this is actually her trying to accelerate her plan. And I think it's because Harrow gets rid of the Protesilaus, zombie.
I think you're right.
It's that suddenly she has to accelerate her plan in a big way and has to adjust what she's doing in a big way. And I think she thinks that the very fastest way that she can get their attention and get them to call in reinforcements is to have something as horrific and as pointed as killing a pair of teenagers. And again, killing a pair of teenagers with death to the fourth house. So it ends up, it is that thing where it's like, it's now targeted. This is not random violence. This is not, just like shenanigans. I think it's a way of doing the worst thing she could do.
Well, because it does get the attention. Like, this does end up starting to kick off things that leads to Judith and Marta calling for the Emperor to get there.
Yes. And I think it actually matters that she did not kill anyone who had keys, because
if she had killed
this way,
anybody,
it cannot be linked. Yeah, because everybody's freaking out and coercing and dueling and whatever over keys. If somebody dies who has keys, it could just be murder for key. And in this case, it has to be murder for chaos, murder for murder. I mean, it's such a fucking horrifically tragic moment. And I think that Jean-Marie and Isaac don't get a lot of play in the series, right? Like, and it's a shame because they're actually brilliant. And we know a lot more about Jean-Marie because she's louder, but I love Isaac in these chapters. Isaac is so fucking smart. Not only is he a great necromancer, actually, he is a great necromancer.
Especially when you consider he's 13.
Yes, he's 13, and he pushes back harder on this construct than anyone is able to until Harrow. Episode 13, Every Weirdo in Canaan House.
Let's recap. Chapter 26, 7th House Skull. Dulcinea knows Gideon's secret. Silas scorns Gideon Nav. An invitation to tea with the 8th. Chapter 27, 6th House Skull. Harrow and Palamedes negotiate for access. Mega Theorem or Secret Door. Harrow and Gideon have a fight.
What the fuck is happening?
I have some thoughts about what might this giant battery source might be, because I am leaning towards the idea that Harrow is totally correct on this. One, I was inspired by the entropy field. So it seems to strip away Thanergy, and maybe that can also be kind of transferred like Thalergy. So that's one thought. It's like maybe there's some sort of a force field. Or alternatively, Harrow notes that there's 60% of Cannon House that they haven't accessed, right? And so maybe there's just this huge Matrix style facility to fuel Lictorhood.
All right, well, yeah, mine was either it's Matrix style or the reason that there's thousands of ghosts. I'm editing my previous conspiracy. I think they ripped open a hole or something, maybe a breach into death or across the river. I don't know, something where they killed thousands of people to weaken the gap, and that's where they're pulling all the energy from. Is they're pulling it straight from the
death?
afterlife. Yeah, from the death or the afterlife, or wherever these spirits are going.
I was also thinking about the winnowing and the transfers, what we've learned from basically sensory translocation. And I think maybe the priests are getting piggybacked to see what's going on in Canaan House, because this is what I was dreaming about. I think I finally found a pattern in the deaths of the 4th and the 5th. It was the oldest and the youngest were killed off first.
I think Coronabeth's not a necromancer. We have seen her do absolutely nothing necromantic. She doesn't do anything. She is either pretending when they're pulling ashes out of the furnace. She doesn't participate at all. She doesn't do anything to help call the spirits back. She just stands there and looks like she's doing it. She's either the strongest necromancer because nothing requires effort from her, or she's not really a necromancer and she's pretending. We've never seen her do anything necromantic. I don't think Coronabeth is a necromancer. 2, I still think it's Lictor is running around Cannon House because somebody immensely powerful put the regenerating bone ash in there, and that seems like something that you would only know how to do if you've solved part of the Lictor theorems. Teacher's been so goddamn useless, I'm thinking that maybe he's not actually a Lictor. I think maybe he's just an actual priest. But I think there is a Lictor running around Cannon House.
No commentary on it this time,
Mommy
John?
and Daddy.
Oh, yeah. We're getting used to it.
Act 4. Okay, Marie, what do you want to talk about this week? I really love every single one of these conversations with the fake Dulcinea, with Cytherea, because it really feels like she's actually in therapy. She is using this opportunity to tell her story pretty explicitly in a way that she's never necessarily been able to tell it before. And the way she describes death as being this escape is especially in this context, not just of a person with chronic illness, but a person who has had chronic illness for 10,000 years and has given up so much of herself and so much of her moral compass and so much of what she believes in the world. It's this idea that you don't have any agency and that you're dying forever. and that to truly accomplish that death would be incredible. She has this line when she says, I'll probably, like, don't be sad, Gideon, I'll probably live forever, more's the pity. Like, she's afraid that she might actually just straight up fucking survive forever. It's like a horror to her. And at the same time, she's also very explicit in every time someone asks her why she wanted to be a lictor. It's because she was scared to die. Yeah, so
it's both at the same time. She doesn't want to continue living the way that she is, and she's so angry about it, but also she's still too scared to die.
Yeah. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about, which I think will feed into their theories, the mega theorem versus secret door debate. Exactly. And John calls that right away. And it really is, it just makes me laugh because for me, this is like a consistent phenomenon with Harrow and Pal, that they both are so smart, but they're blind to certain aspects. And there's multiple times when Harrow is like, you know, the sixth house is too obsessive about the details of like the aging of Canaan House. They're not paying attention to the actual goal. And at the same time, Harrow is like paying attention to the actual goal and missing out on some of the clues that would be useful to her. And this is such a good example of that because it is a mega theorem that teaches you how to be a battery. Like it is literally both of the things simultaneously. The whole thing is wild and weird and we're missing information. I really fucking dig Palamides understanding so early, but wanting to do the like last triple checks. We actually had a listener who I have forgotten to respond to, and I, you know, hopefully will have done by the time this episode comes out. We had a listener comment on one of our episodes that there's this moment during the anniversary party when Palamides gives Dulcinea tea, knowing, and we know this from other information, from some of the short stories, that she hates tea. So it's almost a test. And I think that Palamides like has a sense of what's going on, but he's unwilling to act until he has like firmly tested all the parameters and knows it for a fact. And the same thing is sort of true with the mega theorem, that he has a real sense of what he thinks it's doing. And he's sitting here saying it can't be right. There has to be a flaw. There's something so wrong with what this obviously builds to.
And the thing that I think is fascinating, because again, I mixed myself up and I listened to the next chapters when we go and talk to Silas, and Silas says the same thing. Yes.
Really? I haven't read those in a while.
He says the same thing where he was like, the obvious thing here is incorrect.
It's unacceptable and I won't be part of it. Right? Silas is a dick, but at least he's consistent.
Well,
he really does have a moral compass that I have like mixed feelings about, but at least he's like, I don't know. It's all interesting. When Ianthe actually becomes a lictor and they all find her, Palamides says, of course I knew what this was, but I dismissed it as being ghastly and obvious.
Ghastly and obvious are my middle name.
Yeah. And it is also like, I don't know, this is classic blind spot for Harrow too, is that it is obvious. Even Gideon during this chapter says so explicitly that Harrow is missing the fact that the central focus is the bond between Cavalier and Necromancer, that it is so clearly a dyad and it's not about the best Necromancer in the house.
Yeah.
All right, do we want to talk about their theories? They're doing such a good job. They've got so much here. I do appreciate this is the first time that like the battery theory has been floated via Harrow. And so I love that they took this and went fully into the Matrix, which was like a logical step, but not one I had taken.
I was like, well, that's a way to do it. And kind of, yeah. It also made me think when Rick was talking, I wrote down continuous thanergy. And then I wrote down, are souls thanergy or a thalergy?
Sorry, this is such a good question. And we don't know enough about how like necromancy totally works.
Are they burning the
you're pinning that soul to yourself?
Are they burning the thanergy? Are they burning the thalergy? Like, are they continually dying, or are they taking the thalergy of a soul that you are just using up slowly?
During the siphoning challenge, Dulcinea says that it has to be life to death. It can't be death to death. You know? That it's fundamentally different than the way the eighth house summons. The eighth house creates a vacuum, but the siphoning challenge that was left behind, that entropy field, is about going from live soul into death magic, death juice. So I actually like the idea that they're drawing thalergy. Yeah. Oh, super interesting. Don't know.
Yeah. Episode 14, A House of Broken Promises.
Let's recap. Chapter 28, Eighth House Skull. Gideon and Silas talk about the children. Silas makes a play for Gideon's keys. Colum keeps his honor. Chapter 29, Third House Skull. Teacher hates the water. Corona Beth wields a sword. A head in a box.
What the fuck is happening?
I just want to briefly say,
What do you mean you don't have a lot? You got a whole paragraph.
yeah, but like we've already kind of covered a lot of this. We already covered a lot of this. John doesn't think that Harrow decapitated anyone. I don't either. It just doesn't feel like her style. For the same reasons, not having any bone wards, barely hiding shit. It just doesn't feel right. So
Her style is more of gang banging by skeletons.
highly prepared. Yeah, and also, like, connecting back to Silas's accusations against the Ninth, like, forever how, like, creepy and mean and domineering that Harrow can be. I just don't think that, like, casual murder, like, via bombing or the sort of casual murder that precedes decapitation, like, just doesn't feel like it's in her wheelhouse. So I don't think that happened. I think somebody either put it there or delivered it to her and she, like, freaked out and wasn't prepared enough in the light of getting a head delivered to her reasonably, I think. But the Ninth House... all the kids in the Ninth House, them disappearing, does make me wonder more about her parents. So I looked back, and there are hints to their death maybe being by suicide, because it talks about them swinging from the ceiling of their cell. But my thought now is, like, maybe they were complicit in the disappearance of children, and they just couldn't handle it after a while. Like, they had enough good in them to, like, not be able to live with that. We talked about the flu story having some merit, but I do genuinely believe that these kids were shuttled away or something, or completely killed for the phallergetic fuel.
So this all started off trying to figure out like a little bit more about the houses, and I got into names, and I got into planets. This unraveled very quickly. So let's see here. So I think we can confirm that the sixth house is on Mercury, because they're close to the sun. They live in like a bunker, basically. And I think the seventh house is on Venus.
And they told us actually at the beginning, I was like glancing back at an older chapter, and they said that there were two planets, the sixth and the seventh were on planets closer to the sun than Earth was.
Yep.
Yes. So I think seventh is on Venus because their names, they're born on Cyprus and Rhodes, which are associated with Aphrodite, who is Venus. And then the third house is born princess of, oh my God, I'm blanking on it. I didn't write it down. Ida. And Ida is a nymph that's involved with both Kronos and Zeus in Greek mythology. So that could be either Saturn or Jupiter. Unsure there. So that makes me think the Mars might be the second house, which would explain like the war thing, right? Because like Aries is, and Mars is like the god of war. So also put a joke in there that they might be from Uranus because they're assholes. But all right, so just continuing through, I went through and started doing a deep dive, which I feel stupid for not doing earlier, about through all the names in the book. And this is what I came up with. So Judith in the Bible cuts someone's head off to save the city. So that seems particularly relevant when we just found Protesilaus' head in a box. Yep. Naberius is a general of hell who is a three-headed dog. And it also is a similar name to Cerberus. Basically, like it's a Greek mythology Bible, like, carry-through line. But also, they don't have a key to the facility, so if Protesilaus was down there, they couldn't have killed him while he was down there. They would have had to wait for him to come up, right, and jumped him. So, I don't know, there's something there. Judith had to cut someone off. Naberius is named after Cerberus, the guard dog of the river Styx, and also Hades. And then Ianthe is the name of a nymph when Persephone is kidnapped, and then when Persephone becomes the bride of death, right, Hades' bride, and Corona is a crown. So maybe at some point Corona Beth gets kidnapped or is sacrificed to death or evil or something. I don't know. If all these names are so associated with, I don't know, there's something there. I'm skipping the fourth house, Brooke, because that's your stuff. You can come back to that. Abigail, fifth house, I don't think particularly relevant. Palamedes is a brilliant general from the Trojan War. He uncovers disguise and trickery. He gets killed by Odysseus. He has basically a revenge plot. And then Camilla is thrown across a river on a spear as a baby. She becomes a warrior huntress. And I think it's also weird that her last name is Hecht, which is not 6, it is 100. Dulcinea is the made-up imposter from Don Quixote. Protesilaus is the first Greek to die in the Trojan War, which is hilarious because, obviously his head just got cut off. Column is Dove. His last name is Ashed, which is bone. And then Silas is a fervent earlier believer in Jesus, which I think makes sense there.
Column is a dove. Symbol of peace, right?
Sacrificial.
Ooh,
what?
that makes sense.
Sacrificial dove.
You do sacrifice doves.
What?
Right.
Who does?
The Romans.
Shit.
And then Harrow, which you people, this podcast made me go into weird Christian subreddits to figure this out because it's not explained very well and it's not believed by all Christians, is that harrowing is basically Jesus descends into Hades and or hell and returns during when he's dead, right? Like during the period before resurrection, but after he's crucified.
Really? And that's the harrowing?
Yes. If you look at that, it's, again, alluded to in the Bible. Some people believe it, some people don't. But it seems like the harrowing is they go into hell to talk to the dead and then absolve them of their sins and or like lead them out. It depends on which version you believe.
You decide if you believe that or not.
Yeah, I don't know. But Hark is just listen. So like listen to the harrowing. And then Gideon is the general who frees the Israelites under overwhelming odds.
So are these all, so far, we've got a mixture of like Roman and biblical.
Yeah, Greek, Roman, and biblical all seems to be pieces here. So, and that's part of what makes this so hard is to like figure out what version of death are they using. Also, like Pluto, which is where the ninth house is also known as Hades, right?
Dude, I think that's
Roman
cool.
planet names. And so Hades is also like the god of death, but also literally the location of death as well. So now I'm starting to lean more towards like they literally actually like lictored death and like the body of death is in the tomb or like
John,
the spirit
that
of
is
death. Like
fucking
something
cool that Hades is locked up in the tomb in some sort of eternal slumber. Maybe that's what the kids were sacrificed for.
And then finally, the last thing was just that I do think between Palamedes saying that the logic is flawed in the creation of Lictor, the Lictor theory, and the actually kindly master painting, which brought me back to BioShock, which maybe it's a deep cut reference or maybe it's just like feeding into my conspiracies. I really do think like all of the houses are failing or the universe is like falling apart and the Emperor fucked up somewhere.
Get in, losers. We're going speculating. You want to bang this out?
Well, fuck.
Okay, I'm going to be honest. It's been a long day. Yesterday was a long day, so I may have spaced out during part of John's list of names, but I did want to come in on one thing in particular.
Please.
I love that Pertessalauus is the first person
So
to
fucking
die
funny.
in the Trojan War.
So fucking
because I
funny.
was like, that's a little on the nose, Tamsin. I was like,
So fucking funny.
I was like,
So funny.
yes, he is very, very dead before they even land. He's literally the first person to die. And the other thing that I thought was funny about that was that, like, if anyone is a Trojan horse, Dulcinea Cytherea is. Like, she's literally coming in there disguised as a totally, I think it's like a perfect analogy. I love it.
Yeah, yeah. So those two, perfect. They make sense in this book. I feel like Colum as a sacrificial dove and Silas as an early convertant to Christianity absolutely makes sense thematically. Don't have to go any further than this book. Palamedes and Camilla, I think, are actually pretty straightforward names.
Camilla, to me, like, I mean, is just like, it was generic warrior. Like, it sounds
Exactly.
like her backstory maybe isn't super important, but she is a warrior woman.
And same thing with Palamedes, like smart dude
Yeah.
also. Then the thing that I caught, which is interesting, but I don't know how much to read into it with Ianthe, is when Tamsin talks about the way that she named her characters, she names them like Cana, Beth, and Abella.
Sorry, I forgot. You had told me this and I had completely forgotten that she intentionally initially was going to make it an Cain and Abel reference, right? Like,
Yeah. And then she was like, that's a little too on the nose.
But I think the other thing that people forget about Judith, and this was like a funny one for me because I used to absolutely adore Judith. I loved the story that she wasn't allowed to be part of the army. And so she kind of like pushes back against her brother by deciding she's going to do something anyway. And she goes and does this thing, seduces this captain or general or whatever, and cuts off his head. And then I actually read the Bible story because I liked the, broad story enough. I went back and read it. And most of Judith's story is about how she's obsessed with being chaste. She's like deeply, deeply obsessed with following the rules and being entirely virgin.
Which makes it even crazier that she is going to go seduce someone to get this done.
Right. Well, so at its core, it's about giving up your sense of self and morals and like who you thought you were in
For a greater
order to
purpose.
save. Yeah, exactly. So it is actually like an interesting and complex character.
I think that it is kind of fascinating that both Nibirius and Ianthe are so deeply associated with like hell and death, right? So Tiberius as a demon who is a general of hell. And then if Ianthe is the name of a nymph who is there and associated with the whole mess when Persephone becomes the bride of death.
This is absolutely going to fuck up my microphone again.
Just do it, queen. That's what she said. In case you think I can hear you, I can't. I wish that I could do better lip reading. There you are. You're back.
Okay, it's working. So 1, 2, 3. The other thing is, like, I know that there's a lot of meaning behind the names, but there also comes a point where you're just like, okay, she just wanted like creepy death type names.
Maybe that too. Yeah.
Is there any chance that with Abigail and Magnus, she just was like, generic white people names?
I think so. I forget I'm sure there's meaning, but I forget what it is. We'll get there when we do extra episodes. It's fine. When you have Harrow and the harrowing of hell.
That was fascinating. I didn't know that harrowing was anything other than like, whoa, harrowing.
Very much setting Harrow up as a savior figure.
That again feels a little on the nose. To what degree do you think she decided that she wanted to name her protagonist Gideon? What Gideon means to most people is Gideon's Bible, the like Bible that you find everywhere you go. It's just
Rocky Raccoon.
I used to loved that song.
Me too.
I had a deep obsession with the Beatles when I was in like elementary school and middle school, and then it faded out as I attempted to become more hardcore and listen to metal.
Oh no, I made
and then it was nothing but Slipknot.
Listen to Beatles all day Thursday, and I was singing along, and they were all like, "What is this song?" And I'm like, "What do you mean? What is this song?"
What? What?
Like very much like, how do you know these? And I'm like, I had a Beatles phase. Okay, I don't know why that isn't a thing anymore.
No, the answer should be, how do you not know them? They are literally iconic. That's fine. That's fine. It's fine. I'm fine.
We're fine.
You know what? Here's what I would like to do briefly, is to just bring it back to some of the things we talked about our very first couple of episodes. One of the things that we were talking about is the ways in which this is a book about love and about relationships. And I feel like these chapters are a particularly interesting set of insights. You know, we start at the end of last episode with this horrible fight between Harrow and Gideon, and then the kind of understanding of relationship and power in the eighth house is so complex and painful. And then Corona wanting to get to be someone she's not, and instead having to pretend to be another person she's not, you know, never getting to be her own self. I just feel like this whole set of chapters is about watching people peeling back the skin over these wounds that have been open and festering and that always hurt. And for the first time, you're getting to see them. And it's just it's a painful thing because Gideon knows about her own pain. I think she forgets that other people have the degree of complexity and the degree of pain that they do. And in a weird way, it hurts her to see it.
Yeah, and I think that this is an interesting kind of study in the fact that in this universe, the necro-cav relationship is set up as something that is kind of like almost mystical and holy and sacred and idealized. And it reminds me of all the ways in which we do this to specific relationships. And if your experience with those relationships does not fit, then you are made to feel as though you as a person are kind of fundamentally doing something wrong, or you are unlovable, or you just aren't doing it right. You're kind of broken. And it reminds me of, you know, children who have to go no contact with their parents.
Yeah.
Or the way that marriage and romantic love in Western society has been set up to really isolate people from other relationships in their lives. Because when you set up somebody to be everything to you, and you're not supposed to go anywhere for any other type of fulfillment. You know, you're supposed to have somebody who's your best friend and your lover and your life partner and your family.
And then you have to feel guilty if you feel like you're not getting all of those things in one place, right? Like you have to feel like you are a failure if it turns out that one size doesn't fit all. And I think part of what's cool about these chapters is it's a reminder that one size doesn't fit anybody, that like you kind of have to shape it around you. It has to be
I'm so sorry.
That a good partnership is about creating a novel space between you that's something you make. It's not something that's foisted upon you.
And I think it's so interesting because of all of the relationships that you see, they are all flawed in some way. So, you take the ninth, you have Gideon and Harrow. They are incredibly fucked up and incredibly complicated. And you could spend an hour just talking about all of the ways in which they have a very intense and strange relationship that is incredibly complicated. And then you go to the eighth, and we just saw all of the ways in which that is an incredibly twisted and complicated, relationship.
The other one that's interesting is you have the fifth house, who I think actually have a truly generous and thoughtful marriage, and don't necessarily have a good. I was going to say, but I think that they're not a great necro-cav pair, like in a weird way.
Specifically because they're married, it's kind of like when you work with your spouse.
Yeah, I mean, they're like happy together, but whether they're functional and powerful and willing to sacrifice themselves and one another in quite the way that you need to be able to really rely on someone, I don't think that Magnus would let Abigail get hurt, even if it was part of what they needed to do. I don't think Abigail would let Magnus get hurt, even though that's part of what, they need. So it's a complicated situation.
And then if you move into the fourth house, teens, you're like, okay, well, it kind of makes sense why all of these relationships would be completely fucked if you are starting them at 9-10 years old.
Yeah, and clearly kind of getting assigned to them. Like Jean-Marie says, she was she was mad at Isaac. He wasn't at all what she wanted.
Yeah. And then third house is obviously incredibly bizarre because you have the familial blood relationship in addition to whatever is going on. And then very much like Ianthe and Corona are so toxically inter and codependent that there isn't room for Nibirius to be anything other than a tool.
Yes. He really just feels like a puppy who's following them along. But he's much less likable than a puppy who's following them along. But it is, I think, a big piece of why this kind of comes up in Harrow the Ninth, that Ianthe actually has a lot of trouble integrating Nibirius's soul. And that's partially because I don't think they had anything in common. I don't think they had a relationship.
Right.
Whereas actually this moment we get to see with Corona and Nibirius is a really interesting one. He's really trying to protect her. I think they would have been an okay necro-cav pairing, except she's not a fucking necro.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the impression that I get too, is that Nibirius's relationship with them was an actual relationship, but tainted with Corona, because he could never have a real relationship with Corona with Ianthe around. And then he didn't have a relationship with Ianthe. He was told what to do by Ianthe.
I mean, it's incredibly telling that Ianthe solves all of the challenges mostly without doing them, literally just looking at them on her own. She's not even willing to bring her sister or Nibirius down and let them in on what she's finding out. She wants to be solo. She wants to be the soul power. So this is something I actually wanted to bring up, is that one of the things that currently happens in this book is people say some version of the phrase, a necromancer should never have to watch their cavalier die, or a cavalier should never have to watch their necromancer die. Mm-hmm. Both of those things get said. And I think it's such a funny, again, oversight on people's parts, realizing that it's not a fucking directional thing. The whole point is that when it's a partnership, it is devastating to lose half of yourself. And it doesn't matter which one you were, even though both of them somehow seem to think that they're in charge of protecting the other one. Yeah. Judith says it's stupid to have to watch your cavalier die. And then Gideon says when Isaac dies, it's stupid. No one should have to watch their necromancer die. Yeah. Episode 15, The Sacred Silence We Keep.
Let's recap. Chapter 30, Ninth House Skull. Gideon blames herself. Palamedes comforts Gideon, Dulcinea, and the beguiling corpse. Chapter 31, Ninth House Skull. Harrow is 200 corpses, the girl in the tomb, one flesh, one end. Bitch.
So, what the fuck, basically?
The ultimate question.
I have just one rampant conspiracy theory that is overwhelming my ability to think about anything else, which is that I believe that the girl in Locked Tomb is Nona the Ninth.
Ooh.
That's all I got this week.
I've now completely disregarded I've solidified the flooding theory, because I think between teacher hating water and them getting in salt water to talk about secrets, I think it has something to do with keeping the dead away or spirits away or something like that. And so I think humanity discovered necromancy and started like doing necromantic shit, and then the pre-emperor god sent the flood to destroy everything. And that's why Teacher hates water and why like the whole earth is covered in water. They sent like a flood of salt water to destroy or like contain, I guess, them breaking open death or discovering necromancy or anything. And then part of that was our emperor lictoring God. I still think that's a thing where our guy took part of God and then sent that spirit, which might be the embodiment of that girl, to the ninth house. There's just so many like
Ways
pieces
this could go.
Yeah. So it's funny because the ninth house is Pluto, which is Hades, and they call it the abyss of the first, which the abyss in Hades is Tartarus, which is where they throw Kronos in Greek mythology after he's overthrown by Zeus.
Wait, Kronos
it's also,
is a Titan?
yes, Kronos is the father of like the original
That's it.
emperor of the gods, and it gets thrown into Tartarus, which is the abyss at the bottom of Hades. So there's just like and there's a saltwater pool around it. I just think saltwater does something to spirits or is corrosive to the dead or something, and that's why they have all these talks in a saltwater pool. It's why the flood was sent to destroy the which we think is Earth. There, still working on that. I think Teacher is an undead construct and or from before the flood or some combination of like the souls of a bunch of houses because of the like throwaway line where he says maybe later Lady Judith will confess to being, an undead specter or whatever. It also would explain his rainbow sash because he's got colors from all the houses. There's something that would also explain why he loves drama from all the houses and why he's like such a gossip is he's actually just part of all the houses. So he wants to know what's going on.
You think he's a puppet?
I'm not sure. He's not alive and he's not like a normal human. So maybe we'll find that out later. That's my conspiracy. And then my biggest one this week is I think Gideon, Dulcinea, and Ianthe and Corona are all part lictor or like partially lictor. I know. I think I said at one point Dulcinea is a lictor. I backed off that for a while. But here's my theory. One, Gideon is surviving all types of things that she shouldn't have. There's a previous lictor named Gideon. I think. We think. I think Dulcinea's lictor. I think it's all just like it seemed very like, oh, this shouldn't work when she. Sorry, I gotta back this up and make this make more sense. When Protestalawis dies, it should have killed her, and then like the theory is that the seventh house was all working in concert to puppet the body, but they're all just like that shouldn't work. Like she's dying. I think Dulcinea is part lictor, or is like similar to Gideon, where there's a spirit of a lictor in her, or like half a spirit. Like like something is there because she's doing necromantic things she should be able to do.
Do you think this ties into how at the beginning, like we hear about the fact that like we have fewer lictors than we did before. They've been like, dying off. They've gotten tired. Like there are fewer. Do you think that this is like a reincarnation cycle where like some of those had to like go somewhere else?
I'm not sure yet because part of it also is they keep describing her as being really old and like looking older than she is. And so like I don't know if Dulcinea is like actually like half like a spirit of a lictor is in her or she like is like her name's also Dulcinea, which is like the made up fake character in Don Quixote, which makes me think that like the whole thing is just a ruse and she might just be partially a lictor. I don't know. I don't know if it's a reincarnation cycle or they move the spirits over.
But then what do you think? Why do you think Coronabeth and Ianthe are also in this group?
Because I think Ianthe seems to know more than she's letting on and seems to be more dangerous than like she just seems to know too much. And I also think it would be weird because of the twins. I think they were trying to pass the spirit of the lictor onto her and they ended up getting split. And so Corona's got half a spirit of the Cavalier and that's why she likes swords and whatnot. And she's not a necromancer. And then Ianthe got the part of the lictor that is the necromancer piece.
Whoa, that's cool. That's cool. That would explain why they like need each other or something if they actually have if they share a soul.
And this is the last conspiracy theory. I think because this was pointed out like very explicitly that Harrowhark they were like fighting each other bloody all the time growing up when they were kids. And that she had parts of Gideon under her fingernails when she went into the tomb. I think only lictors or the god can get into the tomb. And the reason that Harrow was able...
That is subtle.
The only reason Harrow was able to get into the tomb was because she's had parts of Gideon on her the entire time like that she's been exploring it, and that's why she hasn't died. She's had like Gideon's blood, or like parts of her hair, or like parts of her under the fingernails. Like that is why she was able to get into the tomb. It's not because Harrow's a great necromancer. It's because she had a lictor, like a tiny fragment of a part of a lictor with her. Because I think Gideon's still part lictor.
I like that theory.
So yeah, I think there's 3 lictors running around, or parts of lictors. So Gideon, Dulcinea, and then Ianthe and Corona are 3. And then I still think there's a lictor running around, or a spirit of a lictor that's the one that's actually killing everyone else. So I still think it's nobody. They got sent from the houses. I think there's still a lictor in Cannon House that's killing everyone.
That's not somebody we already know, or is amongst the people we've already met?
No, it's not among the people that we've already met.
And goes along with those 2 bodies that are in the incinerator from before.
Yes, it's a completely different thing.
Yeah. Well, but like going along with this idea that there are others we haven't met around the first house, around Cannon House.
Yes. Sorry, that was incoherent, but that's everything I cooked up
No.
this week.
I think I followed you. That dude, I am really liking that little Gideon. I think you're cooking.
Get in, losers. We're going speculating.
I also love the idea that Ianthe and Corona Beth could be like a lictor split in half, which is at the end of the day literally what a Cavalier Necro pair is just 2 pieces that when put together create a lictor. And they would be a good lictor together, but instead it's just Ianthe is a necromancer and Corona is along for the ride. She's got great hair. I really want to talk about, so I think that these chapters kind of epitomize Tamsin's love of Easter eggs, and like, you know, I don't know what to call it. That kind of like equivocation talk where you're saying something to the audience that's different than what you're saying to the rest of the characters, or you're saying something to you and I who know the whole book that's different than what you're saying to Brooke and John. So the first one that I love is that when Dulcinea is talking about Protesilaus' accident, she tells the whole thing explicitly as a story. She says multiple times, hypothetically.
Well, and John picked up on that. He says, allegedly.
Yeah, it's just so great. She's like, hypothetically, if you had 2 dead bodies, one slightly more alive, wouldn't you do this? And Harrow, for instance, like pushes back really hard because she's like, it's impossible for a single person to do that without more power. And we already know that. She goes, well, wouldn't it be possible if all of the necromancers did it together? And like, it's just so fucking funny. I also, John totally picked up on the thing that I left out, which was Judith asking if anyone else wants to come forward as a dead ass construct, and teacher says maybe later. And it's just so beautiful.
Maybe later, Lady Judith.
It's okay. So actually in this same vein, so there's a part where Harrow is talking about how breaking that construct, breaking Protesilaus, ought to have killed Dulcinea. And Pal says maybe that spreading it between multiple casters diluted it. And Ianthe says, that's not remotely
how it works.
That's not remotely how it works.
Episode 16, the civilized thing to do.
Let's recap. Chapter 32, Second House Skull. Harrow and Pal open a door without permission. Dead-ass skeletons and priests. The second house calls in the cavalry. Chapter 33, Eighth House Skull. A body has been defiled. The third house steals a key. Chapter 34, Third House Skull. Ianthe rises to lictorhood. Column is possessed. You lied to us.
What the fuck is happening?
We learned a lot in these chapters. A lot of questions, a lot of outstanding questions were settled, right? We figured out how they make nice skeletons. We figured out who Teacher is. We figured out that the Emperor seems to be alive. That we know where the last key was. We figured out at least part of who's in the incinerator. Figured out how lictors are made. Yeah. We've confirmed indeed that the Corona Beth is not a necromancer. And we also saw what happens when somebody gets emptied in Cannon House. So a lot of shit. My approach to what the fuck is happening this week was to figure out what we still don't know. How did Dulcinea live through Pro's disassembly? I won't call it a death since he was already dead. Is she actually some sort of a lictor? Is she pretending to be sick? Is she a sick lictor? Is she an imperfect lictor since like part of Pro's soul had to be in the puppet?
I'm 100% on board now that Dulcinea is a lictor or has the spirit of a lictor. So what I think might have happened is that the 7th house lictor is still alive and wanted to try to save Dulcinea for some reason. And so taught her how to do the lictor process, but the accident was they fucked up lictoring Protesilaus. So Protesilaus was killed the same way as Babs, and then the body's in the furnace, and I think that probably the other body is the body of the 7th house lictor. I'm still on the theory that one of the old lictors is going around murdering people, and we haven't figured out who it is yet. Like, it still might be a character that we have not met.
What is written on the wall and who wrote it? We already kind of discussed this a little bit. Did we decide what we think it is?
I don't have the foggiest idea. I have no idea. All we know is Pal probably knows now. Pal knows now, right? Because he touched it.
Get in, losers. We're going speculating.
I don't know how much I want to talk about their stuff other than to be like, well, they're pretty much fucking there. I do think that it's hilarious. The thing that I'll point out is I think that it is hilarious that John has absolutely clocked it. Next thing they're doing is they're going to go back to Dulcinea. Yep. Not for the reasons that he thinks, but that is the exact next step. I can't wait for the screaming over the next couple hours as he reads.
Oh yeah, literally. We're going to get a text in like 20 minutes.
Also, this is like 36 is like it, right? Like that is because 37 is Harrow finishing the fight and the epilogue is her being taken off planet, right?
Can confirm.
Yeah.
This is like 36 really is next episode
and also
is the end.
Yeah. Like as listeners, you should know this is absolutely fucking cruel because we are not recording next week. He has to sit with that for 2 fucking weeks.
Poor baby. But he's gonna, I think they're both going to feel super vindicated because they both at this point are really strong on Dulcinea as a lictor. They're going to feel good about understanding who the other dead body in the incinerator is. I actually really appreciated some of Brooke's like obsession about the demon that entered Column's body because that's something we still don't totally understand. And you know,
we just got a text from John that says, "Son of a bitch, goddamn it."
Way less than 20 minutes.
So he's just learned that Dulcinea is Cytherea.
And he has 2 weeks to sit on that before he can talk about it. He's coming over later for D&D. He's going to be so mad.
Anyway, where were we?
Act 7? 6? 9? Honestly, I've lost track, truly. That was so much fun to spoil things. And now that Brooke and John are caught up to speed, we'll do a recap next week. And then the week after that, we'll have 2 episodes, one where we read The Mysterious Study of Dr. Sex, which is safe for anyone who has read Gideon, and one where we invite on some special guests to join Hannah and I reading As Yet Unsent, which is full of spoilers for Harrow the Ninth. Beware. If you want to follow along with us, our reading calendar is available on our website at frontlinefifth.podbean.com, and you can follow us on Instagram and TikTok, which are linked in the show notes. If you enjoyed this podcast, please tell your friends and give us a 5-star rating anywhere you can. And of course, if you didn't enjoy the podcast, feel free to lie. We have a Patreon, which you can join for access to bonus content every month. You can become a patron, and we do love our patrons, at patreon.com/frontlinefifth. Finally, if you have any fun theories you'd like to share with us, feel free to email us at frontlinefifth@gmail.com. With that, I'll just remind you not to unlock any tombs or enter any doors without permission because, you know, ghosts. Bye! Do you like this version of my voice? I did it first thing in the morning just for you. Frontline Fifth is a Locked Tomb podcast conceived by Maria Adamako and starring Maria Adamako, Hannah Grunwald, Brooke Anderson, and John Ryan. Our cover art was designed and created by Maria Adamako, who also edited this episode. Our fabulous music was composed and recorded by Blake Anderson. The Locked Tomb series is a completely dope-ass book series by Tamsin Muir, who does not know we exist and is in no way affiliated with this podcast.